Hello everyone, welcome back to Cars and Kelley. It has been a while since the last video, but I've just had so much else going on that I really haven't been able to do much in terms of filming. But the last video, although it was a couple months ago, was about my suspension. I recently put in some coilovers and sway bars, kind of overhauled the whole suspension system in the car, and I just wanted to give some impressions right off the bat of how it felt, installation process, and how I drove. But now that it has been a couple months and they've settled in and I've made adjustments and stuff, I wanted to come back for a more thorough review of this setup. So like I mentioned before, these are Flyin Miata VMAXX Coilovers. This is the regular classic kind of base model of those coilovers for the 99 to 2000, so NB1 Miata. They do offer through Flyin Miata the classic, which is this, or the sport or track models, which are higher end, a couple $100 more that offer adjustable damping in addition to adjustable height, which is all that this has. The reason I opted for this sort of lower end coilovers, lower end in the range at least, is because this is pretty much 100% just a street car. I've never taken on the track. I would like to at some point, but when I do, that will be few and far between, all the trips I make to and from school, work, and stuff. So really, I didn't want to invest a lot of money in like a really high-end adjustable suspension system for a car that's pretty much going to be driven on the street every day. Still, be driven hard and like spiritedly on fun roads and stuff, so I wanted to have something nice, not like really base coilovers, but I didn't want to spend too much in terms of like adjustable damping and higher end stuff like that. One of the reasons I got this car in the first place, like I've said many times, is the cheapness of all the parts. So I wanted to stick to that kind of mentality. I was able to get this whole set of coilovers for about $600-700 shipped to me. So that was really impressive for a full set of suspension. Not very many cars you could say that about. So yes, even though they are sort of lower end in the coilover world, and I do have some reservations about them, for the price and compared to the cost this would be on a different car, it's still a great value. But I talked a lot about why about them in the previous video, so this time I want to explain a little bit more about just how they've settled in and how it drives now after they've been installed for a couple months. After I installed them, I waited a few weeks, actually I think 3 or 4 weeks, to sort of let the ride height settle before I was going to readjust them. And the front actually did achieve a noticeable drop during those few weeks. As you see right here, this is pretty flush. Obviously it could be lower. You could have even more of a flush look. But for like functional everyday, this is sort of what I was going for. So those did sit nicely in the front after a few weeks of setting in. I didn't actually have to do much of adjustment at all after that settling in period, just because I sort of stuck to the recommended Flyin Miata ride heights pre-settling, so that it'll sort of settle into a good ride height. For the back, however, I sort of set it up similar to the front when I was installing them, sort of giving it some space to compress and settle over a few weeks, but as you can see, it didn't really much. I was sort of surprised after waiting a few weeks to not see this rear ride height decrease some more because of, just the springs settling in over time, and they didn't much. This is still, I would consider a pretty big wheel gap, and sure, it's probably less than it was before, less than stock, but you really can't tell that much of a difference without getting a ruler. And for those who might ask, why don't you just adjust it lower after the settling in period to fix that? Well, I did. This is pretty much actually at the lowest setting in the rear. Could go maybe a tiny bit more, but I don't want to be riding on the bump stops or have a pretty harsh ride every time I hit a bump, so I didn't want to really sacrifice that just for a tiny bit more drop. When I took it in to get aligned after this few week waiting period, I asked them about that. I was like, why is the front settling in so well and looking nice and flush, and the rear is still sort of monster truck? Basically what we talked about and what they said was, because these are sort of lower end coilovers that don't have as much adjusting, you can't adjust the shock body individually from the spring height. There's just really only so much adjusting you can do on these rear coilovers. Which, I get it, these are cheaper, they're not going to have as many adjustments, but still a little disappointed that these aren't able to go at least much noticeably lower than stock even. But it's not all bad with the ride height. They did say the rate between the front and the rear, sort of the angle of the tilt, is pretty good. So not too much to worry about other than like the way it looks, not looking exactly as low as I would like. The heights between the front and the rear is actually pretty good. So I got it aligned at a local performance Miata shop here in the Bay Area, and they recommended, for sort of my purposes, which is a combination of regular everyday driving and sort of spirited canyon driving, an alignment from 949 Racing called the Dual Duty, so sort of trying to strike a nice middle ground between a street and a track car. There's a little bit of camber in the front, I think around 2 degrees or a little less in the rear too. So not too extreme, nothing too aggressive. You can't really notice it that much unless you really look for it. But definitely, the alignment made a huge difference in terms of the way this car drove. Honestly, I noticed just as much of a handling difference from the alignment as I did actually installing these parts in the first place. And not that the alignment was really bad before. There's nothing out of line or not straight about the wheels before, but it's just having that sort of subtle performance adjustments with camber and toe and all that stuff really changes a lot in terms of the way a car drives, especially with suspension like this. Sort of what I said before in my other video in my initial impressions was that the sway bars really seemed to did the biggest difference in terms of overall, drastic changes after installing everything. The sway bars really tightened everything up in terms of turn-in and, weight transfer from left to right and stuff. But after the alignment, I can really feel a huge difference overall, just with ride quality and with smoothness and sharpness of turn-in. It's just really a different level than it was before. Definitely not the comfiest ride, of course. Obviously, it's coilovers, but you really feel the benefits of these of a setup like this when the road smooths out. You did a really nice sort of stretch of the road to feel everything that's going on, and it's really a huge difference. Things I would do differently next time, perhaps install like the sway bars first only, test drive it, and then install the coilovers and test drive it, or vice versa, or kind of just don't do it all at once. I did that on purpose just because I sort of had to with my time and when I could install stuff. It being convenient to do everything at once, but really it would be interesting to do just the sway bars and see how that changes it, or do just the coilovers, see how that changes it, to see sort of more individual effects of these parts. I really only have a couple issues with this setup. First being just kind of the rear installation was a little bit not straightforward versus the front. I mean, actually putting the suspension in the car for the rear was easier, but assembling the shock itself with the spring was kind of difficult just because the longer spring than the shock body, so I had to compress it with the weight of the car to tighten everything down. A little bit unusual, sort of a hassle. Once I got that in the car, that's not really a problem anymore. But obviously the big other reservation that I mentioned may or may not be a big deal to some people, but again, this ride height in the back, a lot higher than I expected it would have been able to go. That one gripe about the rear ride height sort of leads me to wish I spent a couple $100 more and got the more adjustable version, the sport model of these coilovers that have adjustable damping as well as just ride height. I believe those are about $850 instead of $600, plus shipping and tax, of course, which is substantially more, but still in the grand scheme of suspension and such a big component of a car, it's really not that much to spend. So I sort of find myself wishing that I had gone the extra mile and got a little bit nicer of a setup. Even though this is mostly a street car, I sort of wish that I could adjust this lower ride height a little more than I can right now. Aside from that, really no unexpected things about this setup. I sort of expected it to tighten everything up, turn in better, handle better, of course, weight transfer from the sway bars. Everything sort of went as planned. And so I definitely recommend the line of Flyin Miata VMAXX Coilovers to any other Miata owners. I would just consider, depending on how you want to set your ride, I would consider getting the slightly nicer, more adjustable versions if you want to have that for the future. If you decide to ever track it or bring it to a track once even, it'll be nice to have that adjustment, which I now don't have. As far as the future of handling modifications to this car, the next sort of big thing I want to do is a roll bar, like a Hard Dog Sport double diagonal roll bar on the back. Less for, actually handling in stiff purposes, although I'm sure it would help a little bit, mostly just because I want to track the car at least once, and that's a requirement for some places to have a roll bar, so that's kind of next on the big list. Aside from that, I really want to look into Flyin Miata's chassis braces. They have a really nice, well-reviewed butterfly brace that you've put, laterally sort of underneath the car to help increase rigidity overall. And people say that it just makes a huge difference in any situation, just feeling sort of like a more modern, newer car, so I want to look into that. Other than that, until I maybe someday have a second car or I'm able to really put a lot into this car as a track car, like a dedicated track car, until then, I sort of don't have any huge plans for more suspension stuff for this car, just because it's, like I keep saying, it's just an everyday car. I want to have a nice sporty setup, but I don't want to put too much into it. That's going to do it, I think, for this video today. Definitely overall positive review of this Flyin Miata VMAXX setup. The sway bars are great. Front sway bar especially, I think, helped a lot with turn-in and coilovers. Obviously, as they always do, kind of just redefine the way the car handles. Flyin Miata too has great customer service. They really know what they're talking about, so if you have a problem, they'll definitely help you out. So yeah, that's it for today, but I am almost out of school, almost summertime, so I'm going to try to put a little more effort and time into this channel and into some more videos in the future. So look forward to a little more frequent stuff going on in a few weeks. Alright, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.